There's a kind and gentle world within our reach, a world to experience, discover, and understand. Hi, I'm Jimmy Buffett. Manatees are graceful marine mammals, a symbol of the quality of life around us. They're in danger of becoming extinct. Many are killed by boat hulls and propellers. Others are victim of man's quest to overdevelop. The manatees are an important part of our fragile ecosystem. Like man, they need a healthy environment to survive. By saving them, we save ourselves.
Could this be the siren of Greek mythology, the half-woman, half-fish creature whose sweet song lured sailors to wreck their ships on rocks? It doesn't seem likely, since this creature can emit little more than a squeak. Could it be the mermaid, a siren-like creature described by exploring sailors? Perhaps, but only if they'd been out of sight of land for weeks on end. Christopher Columbus reported seeing these mermaids and noted they weren't as attractive as he'd been led to believe. No, this is the manatee, the denizen of our coastal waters and one of the most gentle animals to be found on our planet Earth. Some have thought this animal to be ugly, clumsy, little more than a great blob in the water. But a visit to the Homosassa Springs State Wildlife Park on the northwest Florida coast should convince anyone that the opposite is true. Viewed from underwater, the manatee is, for the most part, slow-moving. But it is also graceful, curious, friendly, charming, and a creature of some beauty, or at least one with a great personality. So, what is a manatee anyway? It is a warm-blooded, air-breathing mammal whose closest land relative is the elephant, the walrus-like appearance notwithstanding. Manatees are of the scientific order Sirenia from the Greek myth. There are two distinct varieties, the dugongs of Australia, the Indian Ocean, and Southeast Asia, and the Amazon, West African, and West Indian manatees. There used to be a third variety, Steller's sea cow, a 30-foot, 3-ton creature which was discovered in the Bering Strait in 1741. It was hunted to extinction in just 27 years. Pity the poor sea cow, bovine of the sea. It's a shame she has a rudder where her udder ought to be. Yes, the manatee has often been called a sea cow, partly because of its grazing habits.
The manatees found off our southern coast are often called Florida manatees. The proprietary interest is nice, but the Florida manatee is actually a subspecies of the West Indian manatee.
The manatee is the only marine mammal which is strictly a plant eater, and eat it can. A full-grown adult can polish off the equivalent of about 2 bales of hay a day. Manatees don't have blowholes like dolphins and whales. They breathe through a pair of nostrils which are thrust out of the water. If resting, the manatee can remain submerged for 15 minutes or more, but in times of exertion will come to the surface for air every minute or so. And manatee calves are born alive and ready to swim. Back when Florida was all wilderness, there may have been thousands of manatees along the coasts, in rivers, bays, estuaries, and springs, in fresh and salt water. According to fossil finds, the manatee has been around Florida for 45 million years.
Now, however, the species is in serious trouble. Mortality from human-related causes has been high for years. In a recent census, more than 1,800 manatees were counted, and some experts think the true population could be as high as 2,500. Some manatees migrate along the east coast in summer months as far north as the Carolinas, and as far west as Louisiana on the Gulf Coast.
But during winter months, virtually the entire manatee population returns to the warmer Florida waters, and therein lies a major problem: coexistence with man, its only real enemy. Since World War II, Florida has experienced unprecedented growth, becoming one of the nation's most populous states, and the decline of the manatee is directly related to that growth. We don't have to travel far to see that most of the old Florida is vanishing. Once pristine wilderness areas replaced by housing developments, condos, hotels, recreational facilities. Florida is a water-oriented state, Many people want to live on or near the water. The resulting construction has destroyed manatee habitat throughout the state. Countless acres of feeding grounds have been lost to dredge and fill projects, pollution from chemically contaminated outfalls, herbicides, polluted surface water, and heavy boat traffic that tears up beds of seagrasses and other aquatic plants necessary to manatee survival.
The essential habitat of the manatee is being developed and degraded, thus making the manatee more vulnerable to human-related injuries and even death. Manatees and boats simply do not mix. Even turtles seem better at getting out of the way, although they occasionally get hit. An estimated 1,200 manatees died in Florida waters between 1979 and 1990, and at least 1/4 of those deaths were known to have been the result of encounters with boats and barges. Since manatees prefer to forage in fairly shallow waters where it's easy to surface for air, they are at extreme risk. Manatees have been run over and crushed by boats and barges, and more frequently, they are sliced by the propellers of fast-moving pleasure craft.
There are few manatees remaining in the wild that don't bear the scars of such encounters. Manatees are not scavengers, but often they ingest monofilament fishing line, hooks, plastic bags, and other litter carelessly discarded by fishermen and others. The debris gets trapped in aquatic plants and may result in injury, illness, even death to the manatee. Because of their nature, manatees have also been subjected to harassment and cruelty by some who encounter them in the wild. They've been shot with firearms and spear guns, slashed and stabbed with knives, roped and tied to pilings, or simply chased until exhausted.
Occasionally, a manatee will become entangled in a trap line and suffer injury to a flipper, or worse, lose the flipper because of the injury. This manatee bears a trapline scar on its flipper.
Some manatees have met a sad end trapped by closing flood control gates and canal locks used to control water levels, especially in South Florida. And the never-ending search for food, or possibly for some peace and quiet, will sometimes cause a manatee to travel far inland through a canal network, only to wind up trapped in underwater pipes or other man-made structures. With all of these hazards, it seems a manatee must be charmed in order to survive. And we haven't even mentioned natural hazards. Outbreaks of red tide, mainly along the Gulf Coast, have contributed to several manatee deaths. And when winter cold fronts cause Florida temperatures to plummet, pity the poor manatee caught too far from a warm water sanctuary. Manatees cannot stand water temperatures much below 68 degrees for long periods of time. They stop eating so as not to burn energy needed to retain body heat, and sometimes starve, and they become susceptible to pneumonia and other diseases. It is not unusual for several manatees to be found dead in the days following a severe cold snap. So far, we've not painted a pretty picture concerning prospects for survival of the species.
But all is not lost. Events of recent years are combining to create the hope that the manatee will survive in Florida.
Potential is there to bring them back. They do breed in captivity. They can survive in close proximity to humans, and they're very adaptable to human conditions. But they're also very fragile, and they have no natural enemies or natural fears. And so understanding that, the manatee has become a symbol of the state of Florida and what we want to do towards protecting our environment. And it's become a symbol of our environment. And it's a tribute to man to be able to recognize this problem and try to help perpetuate this species.
Manatees have been protected since 1972 by the Federal Endangered Species and Mammal Protection Acts, which not only protect critical habitat, but also impose heavy penalties for molesting manatees in any way.
The Florida Manatee Sanctuary Act of 1978 established the entire state as a manatee sanctuary. Now there are many miles of waterways in key coastal counties where boats must proceed at slow or even idle speed so as not to endanger manatees. Those include the spring-fed river areas of central and northern Florida where manatees gather in winter, and power plant areas where warm water discharges attract manatees.
Crystal River is a major winter manatee gathering place on the Gulf Coast because of the warmth of the spring-fed river water and the warm water discharges from the Crystal River Power Plant.
On Florida's southeast coast, the areas of the Florida Power and Light Company plants at Port Everglades and Riviera Beach often look like manatee conventions are underway. It is not unusual for 200 manatees to gather in a discharge canal on a cold winter day. And Florida Power and Light does more than just tolerate manatees. FPL is part of the Save the Manatee campaign through the funding of aerial tracking and census efforts, sponsorship of manatee awareness seminars, and distribution of educational materials.
But danger lurks nearby in the Port Everglades Channel and the intracoastal waterway through Fort Lauderdale, which has one of the biggest concentration of pleasure boaters anywhere. Under the Sanctuary Act, year-round and seasonal speed zones have been established, and boating has been banned in some areas altogether. But so many boats and so many manatees add up to an enforcement problem for the Marine Patrol.
It's a very dangerous area for boaters. We have waterways in the intracoastal in Broward County that are many times rougher than it is out on the ocean. And the manatee, of course, is right in the middle of all this. The manatee is a gentle and harmless creature, and yet people tend to go out there and in many cases throw caution to the winds and not even care about them. I certainly see a contrast between the west coast of the state and the Homosassa area, for example, and the lower east coast of Florida. In the down here in my area, people tend to be the me-first generation. We have a lot of what we call the go-fast boats, the generic high-speed boat, and a boater says, my boat can go 60, I'm going to go 60. Who cares about anything else? Basically, it's a lack of concern of one person for the safety and welfare of another, and also a lack of concern for the safety and welfare of the animal, the manatee. Over on the west coast, the manatee is like the leading citizen of the town. I think people appreciate them more. The whole feeling of attitude is much better, I think, and the understanding is there. We have many people on this coast that are working very hard to help the manatee and that show a great deal of understanding and compassion, and they're spreading word through education, and I think that's very important.
The plight of the manatee really didn't start capturing the public's fancy until the 1980s, when then-Governor Bob Graham and singer-songwriter Jimmy Buffett started Save the Manatee, a national nonprofit organization. And the Save the Manatee Club, now about 32,000 members strong, undertook major information and education campaigns. The club also raises funds through its Adopt a Manatee program and sales of gift items, and public awareness has increased.
We're finding that the public understands the plight of the manatee and is more conscious of the need to slow down and observe the manatee in its normal habitat and try not to molest it or create a hazard that might injure or alter their feeding habits or their natural tendencies to migrate into the waters and resident here in the winter.
The Florida Marine Patrol is a key element in a statewide response network for the rescue of sick and injured manatees. Special teams comprised of various state, federal, and local agencies can mount a rescue on a very short notice. When a manatee is rescued in South Florida, it is usually taken to the Miami Seaquarium, where it can be treated medically or surgically by experienced marine veterinarians. If the manatee survives, it may remain at the Seaquarium for several months of recovery. If recovery time is brief, the animal may be released right back into the wild. But a long convalescence may require reacclimation to the wild in a special sanctuary. Homosassa Springs State Wildlife Park is just such a sanctuary, and more. The park and surrounding areas constitute one of the few unspoiled wilderness areas remaining in Florida. For a nominal fee, the visitor can get close to a variety of wildlife: deer, alligators, herons, cormorants, wild turkeys, black swans, and the ubiquitous squirrels. The spring, which produces 6 million gallons of fresh water daily, is the headwater of the Homosassa River, and it is home to lunker snook, redfish, snapper, jacks, and catfish. Many an angler has wished to be able to drop a line in these waters just once. Sorry, no fishing. The park also provides ranger-guided wilderness boat tours, focusing on the native flora and fauna.
That's called an anhinga, snakebird, water turkey, or dartbird. The proper name for that bird is called an anhinga. They don't have any oil in their feathers, so when they get wet, they have to come out and dry before they can fly any distance.
The park also has a nature museum containing a wealth of information about manatees and other species. In another area, the visitor will find birds of prey, hawks, owls, and eagles. These are part of successful rescue programs, but these birds were all injured and can no longer survive in the wild. It is the manatees, though, that are the star attractions at this park. Homosassa Springs State Wildlife Park has been described as a halfway house for manatees. Animals which arrive here from the Miami Seaquarium or SeaWorld in Orlando will become reacclimated to a natural environment before being returned to the wild. Others will live out their lives here. The manatees have a natural spring environment in which to roam, plenty of food, medical care when needed, and protection from the hazards of the outside world. And these manatees, with names like Rosie, Amanda, and Star, are serving an educational purpose. 3 times a day, a park ranger goes into the water to tell visitors all about this gentle creature, with emphasis on preserving the species.
Now this is Amanda right here. Amanda was rescued about 19, 20 years ago after she was hit by a boat. And when she was rescued, she had a baby by her side. Whoops, smiling one back here is a baby. This is Ariel. Of course, Ariel's grown up now, about the same size as Amanda. About 4.5 years ago, Amanda had a baby in here, and that's Betsy. That's Star. Star is the first baby born here. This is Star right over here. Then about 1.5 years ago, Amanda had another baby in here, and that's Betsy, and Betsy's right here. And this is Rosie right here. I introduced you already. We try to keep the contact with the public limited, but we do programs in the water just so people get to realize their personalities, and it's not just a floating blob out there. They do have personalities, and they are kind of special, but we don't have anybody going down there. The people don't go down there and feed them or pat them or anything like that. The idea is to keep it as natural as possible. Then we have the educational program here, too.
The manatees of Homosassa are also adding to the body of knowledge about the species. Until recent years, there had not been a great deal of manatee research. Behavioral studies were very limited. These manatees are providing information that will help in the implementation of future protection plans. While setting out to shoot underwater video for this project, cameraman Pat Lynch learned how curious and friendly manatees can be. One appeared as soon as Pat's feet hit the water and seemed reluctant to get out of the way. Some seemed fascinated by the lens and would stick their noses against it, sometimes pushing Pat backward several feet. We're not suggesting that people get into the water to seek out manatees, but if you're diving or snorkeling and a manatee shows up, do what Pat did. Don't touch or grab, just relax and enjoy.
Their skin kind of feels like elephant skin. It was sometimes kind of difficult to maneuver around with the camera, although they're so curious and everything that as long as you don't make any sudden moves, they just kind of swim around and look at you like a little kid or something.
Seeing manatees close up in their element, one wonders how anyone could have found them frightening. But when seen from a boat in murky waters, they have been mistaken for sharks, whales, probably even sea monsters. And if one surfaces beside a boat on a quiet lagoon, a manatee expelling air and spray can frighten the bejabbers out of a daydreaming fisherman. One thing researchers have been able to study here is the relationship between a mother and her calf and how they interact with the rest of the group. Baby Betsy was born here in the fall of 1990. A baby manatee will nurse for as long as 2 years, getting nourishment from nipples under the mother's flippers. A few weeks after birth, the calf will start some limited feeding on vegetation. It's not unusual for other female manatees to babysit calves when the mother needs a rest or a brief getaway. And sometimes adult manatees will nurse from a mother who is willing. Manatee mothers are very protective of their offspring, ushering them away from what are seen as threats, all the time keeping their own bodies between baby and intruder. You may have noticed in these underwater shots that the manatee doesn't really use its flippers for propulsion. That's all in the tail. The flippers are used in steering, or when the manatee wants to roll over. The flippers are also used to hold food, dig, and pull along the bottom. On rare occasions, manatees have been seen pulling themselves partway out of the water to munch vegetation on the shoreline. The bone structure of a manatee flipper is amazingly similar to that of a human hand, although the nails do look more like those of an elephant. Perhaps one of the manatee's most endearing qualities is that it is so benign, so harmless, so non-threatening. Since the manatee is not a predator and has no natural enemies, it has no weapons, no defense system. That's why it's so vulnerable to the acts of man, intentional and otherwise. If those who would do harm to a manatee could spend some time observing them in this clear water environment, fascination might overcome aggression. The efforts to understand and protect the manatee have come a long way in just a few years. Man is realizing the need to change from enemy to savior in order to prevent the manatee from disappearing from Florida waters. Extinction, after all, is forever. Research by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Florida's Department of Natural Resources, universities and private organizations, the educational efforts of the Save the Manatee Club and Florida Audubon Society, and enforcement by the Marine Patrol and local agencies are all having an effect. Future growth management plans will provide more protection of manatee habitat. Expect to see expansion of sanctuary areas and more limits on boating. And agencies charged with managing and developing water resources, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Florida Water Management Districts, are instituting new policies to afford more manatee protection. But that's only part of the job. The rest is up to each citizen. What can we all do to help protect the manatee? It's simple. Be aware of how to behave in a manatee habitat. Observe the boat's speed limit and no entry signs. Wear polarized sunglasses and always be on the lookout for signs of manatees such as a tail or nose breaking the water's surface. Try to keep your boat in channels and away from shallow grass beds. If you see manatees, either stop the boat or give them a wide berth. Never pass over them with a boat. Don't toss fishing line and other debris overboard. When swimming or diving, don't chase manatees. If you remain quiet, one may swim over to check you out. Even then, don't grab or even touch them. And never feed manatees. And if you see a manatee in distress, being harassed, or wearing a tag, report it by calling 1-800-DIAL-FMP. If you really want to learn more about manatees and see them close up, go to Homosassa Springs State Wildlife Park, Blue Springs State Park, SeaWorld, Epcot Center, the Miami Seaquarium, Lowry Park Zoo in Tampa, or Crystal River. And if you're still wondering why the manatee deserves our consideration, listen to these words from Captain Bob Douglas of the Florida Marine Patrol.
There's an overall trend to understand more how the manatee relates to man every day, and that the manatee is really one of our environmental barometers. As a mammal, he is susceptible to all the things that we're susceptible to. And the public in learning has become aware that should this fragile creature disappear, that so may man. The environment that surrounds us is indicative of what occurred in or what existed in Florida thousands of years ago, and some of it has been frozen here. So the manatee is trying to adapt in his ability to utilize power plant outfalls for warm water protection in the winter and estuaries that are protected. But generally, as the habitat decreases, so will the creature. So those few remaining areas become more sensitive and more susceptible to loss and thus affecting the general populations.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Buffett. Manatees are the official state marine mammal of Florida. Yet it's ironic that visitors and residents may soon cause the extinction of these gentle and graceful marine mammals. Manatees are an important part of our fragile ecosystem. Like man, they need a healthy environment to survive. By saving them, we save ourselves.